The way I'm going to do this comparative review is rather than have, Christopher Nolan's film over here and then Homer's poem over there, I'm going to review the monsters one by one as they appear in the film. And then I'm going to do a section just talking about the character of Odysseus in the film, because that is very much like the biggest and most important divergence from not just like the Homer's Odysseus, but also like the character of Odysseus, who changes quite a lot, like from text to text and from book to book, and like every writer treats him differently. And I think it's fair to say writer here, because Christopher Nolan does write his own screenplays, so this is very much something, he's not just directed this film, this is really his creative project. He has like control over it in a way that most directors don't. So yeah, like I'm going to talk about it in a sort of auteurist way. But anyway, Christopher Nolan's Odysseus is a new thing for like the 21st century. So that is a thing that needs to be talked about by itself. But first, let's talk about the monsters, beginning with Calypso. And so obviously when I say monsters, I don't really mean like monsters, because it's more like the structure of this poem and the story is that, you go on a boat, you arrive on an island, everyone cautiously looks around for supplies, and then, there's a monster, run back to the ship, or they have to deal with a threat in some way, shape, or form. And some of these are not actually monsters. Like in the case of Calypso, she is an immortal, she's a goddess, and she just likes Odysseus, and they stay together on this island for, I think, 7 years. They said 7 years in the film. I think it was that in the poem. Calypso is a goddess, or like, actually she's like a nymph, I think, or a sort of semi-goddess. She's not top tier goddess. She's not Mount Olympus, right? She's like kind of like a low tier immortal. And she takes a fancy to Odysseus, and they just stay on this island, and she doesn't let him go. And the reason she has so much power is because of her divinity, right? So instantly at the beginning of the movie, we see Odysseus speaking to Athena, and then Calypso saying like, oh, you're talking to yourself again, or something like that. So that's telling us a lot of things in a few moments. One is that like the gods and goddesses maybe are just sort of psychological in this world, and that's like something that's been done before, in a kind of Jungian way, that like the gods and goddesses that we used to imagine as real are now just, we see them as more like neuroses, like things that like are bits of our character that we repress or whatever. But that's one thing that it's signaling. The other thing is that Calypso definitely isn't one of them, because she's like a human. She's chatting to him like a human, and she can't see the Athena that he sees. So given that Nolan has stripped Calypso of her divinity, right? How is it that she has power over Odysseus to like keep him here on this island, even when he wants to leave, when he wants to go home? Now, this is kind of ingenious, I think. What Nolan has done is combine three of the sort of monsters or like island events into one. We have the Lotus Eaters, right? Which is an event in the poem where they arrive on an island and they eat this fruit, which makes them want to just stay. It's like it's a intoxicating drug-like fruit, but it's also kind of magical. Like once you eat the lotus, you just don't want to go home anymore. You just want to stay on an island, enjoy your life, have a great time, and then you have to be dragged kicking and screaming back onto the boats and like kind of just crying, wishing you could have more of that delicious fruit. It's very much a Sesame Street Cookie Monster and his cookies scenario. And like in the film, immediately we see that as he gets distressed, Calypso offers him the lotus fruit. She says, eat the lotus fruit, right? And then he eats it and then he chills out. So, if you're not familiar with the myth, then maybe it's like, there's something up with that fruit and this woman. But if you're like, okay, so he's replaced her divinity like with this power of basically being able to, drug him into oblivion so that he'll stay with her. I just thought that was a genius way of condensing this literary material into one episode, which makes it shorter and easier to turn into a film. And also you get two for the price of one in terms of Odyssey content. But actually, like I said, it's three for the price of one, because the Nausicaa episode is gone. This is when he washes up on the shore and he meets this Princess Nausicaa, and she takes him to her kingdom, and he's treated very well, he's fed and he's clothed, and the king of the Phaeacians, I think they're called, the people, he says like, okay, well, you're our guest here, we've fed you, we've clothed you, now please tell us who you are. And he says, right, let me go back to the Trojan War. And then he starts telling the whole thing, right? And like, so it's a lot of the Odyssey is him as a storyteller in the first person saying what he did from the Trojan War up to that point. This is just as a side note, this really fits Christopher Nolan's way of making films, of like chopping things up in time and splicing them all around. Like a lot of that, like when you're watching it, you're feeling, yep, this is like one of his films, but also it's in the original poem. So that was like the one thing that I feel really like made sense. So much of the idea of the Odyssey being filmed by Christopher Nolan made no sense when I heard it. This is the one thing where I see there's a sort of overlap, right? But anyway, back to Calypso. So she is all three. She is the lotus fruit, she is Calypso, and she is the king of the Phaeacians, as the sort of the listener to hear Odysseus' story. Now, Christopher Nolan, I think, is sort of, I don't know if he's notorious exactly, but I think I'm not the only person who thinks he's very bad with female characters in general. Like, women in his films are just pretty shallow, and pretty, but like, yeah, they're pretty, shallow, and pretty shallow. But like, maybe he's heard this criticism and learned from it, because Calypso was great. I love Charlize Theron. Yes, obviously, she could have been a bit more interesting. Charlize Theron, could have done more with the character to like make her a little bit more maybe evil and a little bit less just like a therapist, make her a bit more like have some more internal contradictions. But I thought it was enough. Her role was like much more psychologically complex than it is in the Odyssey by Homer, I think. So as an adaptation, Calypso gets a big thumbs up from me. Next up is the Cyclops. I was wondering about this as we were watching it, because the gods seem to not exist in this world, and Calypso is like a human with a drug rather than an immortal. So I thought, are we gonna have supernatural things? Is this gonna be like a purely realistic Greek myth retelling? I think Troy, the 2000s film Troy, doesn't have any supernatural elements, but telling that story, like Homer's first poem, the Iliad, it's kind of easy to take out the magic, because essentially the gods are just playing chess with the humans and saying, okay, this arrow misses because I chose, and it's like you can just extract all that and still have the war going on. But the magic, and the gods and their role in the story is so much more integral to the Odyssey. So it's so hard to take out the supernatural, I think. And so that's why, like, when we get to the Cyclops, it was a bit of a relief. Like, okay, you're doing this. We are going to have monsters in this film. And the Cyclops is a great monster. He looks very scary, I thought. Like, the way they do his face sort of twisted, as though like that's why he has one eye. Like, it's sort of like almost been like pulled or deformed in a certain way, to shrink up the features. It's good. His skin looks kind of freaky. It's just like quite freaky to look at as a monster, and he's always in darkness, and he's at the same time as being scary, he's very animalistic. And like the scariest thing in the whole film was when he gets hurt. When they take out his eye, his howls of pain. Like, I don't know how they got these sound effects, but they were chilling. Maybe it was the IMAX thing. I saw it in the IMAX. I haven't been in IMAX since I was a kid, but the sound system was incredible. And like, I felt like I'm scarred. I'm never going to be able to, sleep again after hearing this poor Cyclops get blinded. So I like that he's scary. He's a monster. He's a good movie monster. But also the scariest things are, hearing his suffering. That just felt like quite artfully done, and like kind of, it made me feel like you've put a bit of thought into this. At the same time, like as an extra thing, I thought that this is not the first, but the second moment when I realized that Odysseus is not the Odysseus from Homer. This is a new character, because in Homer, when he leaves, he kind of like, he can't help himself. He shouts back at the Cyclops, and he's like, and by the way, the person who tricked you, the person who outwitted you is me, Odysseus. Don't forget it. Tell your friends. And so the Cyclops tells his dad, Poseidon, right? Like, Odysseus blinded me. That's not cool. I'm not happy. Please don't let him get away with this. And so then Poseidon becomes the main antagonist of the poem, right? And so it's like a god versus these humans trying to get home. And that's like pretty essential, right? Whereas this film's Odysseus is not a trickster, right? He's not a trickster. He's not a cheeky little boy who can't help but like kind of brag about his achievements. He's, really serious and full of like responsibility for his men and like kind of honor. And he has pride, but not in the pride in the sense of, haha, I got you. Pride in the sense of like, these are my men and we are together as a group. And what happens is the Cyclops, after they get away, chucks the head of one of his friends at his feet, right? And then he shoots an arrow at the Cyclops' face and it chases them, right? At the time when I was watching it in the cinema, I didn't like it because I thought, okay, instead of the taunt, we're getting an arrow to the face. because it's slightly different, and like I see they're doing it in a more action hero-y way, whatever. It's not, not my Odysseus, not Homer's Odysseus, not really any Odysseus up to this point. But now that I've seen the whole film, it makes sense. It's setting us up for who this guy is going to be, and for other things to happen. Like, for example, the crew don't like that he shot the Cyclops in the face, and then they start saying stuff like, yeah, that Cyclops said he was the son of Poseidon. I heard him, when all we really heard were animalistic grunts. Correct me if I'm wrong, to people who've seen the film. And I don't think you could actually hear him saying any words. He was just like kind of, howling, I think. But the crew are like, he said he's the son of Poseidon. So, anything that happens from now on in the film is your fault, Matt Damon. This is all on you. And it's just a clever way, again, to make it like the primary antagonist of Poseidon has been... the structure will still work with him sort of as an antagonist, but now we see it's a psychological dilemma between the crew and the captain rather than an actual struggle between a god and a crew, right? So that's deliberate, like thoughtful, taking something from the poem and making it more psychologically real, but not in a way which disrupts the structure or the flow of the actual story. Next, we have the Laestrygonians, these cannibalistic giants, which most people don't remember, or it's not like they're often not represented at all in like kind of retellings of the Odyssey. Even though they're really important because they sink almost all the ships that are coming back from Troy. But like it's this little episode where they arrive on the island, and they're invited back to a castle, like in terms of hospital, like in a hospital way, like, yeah, we'll give you food and drink, and then they're betrayed and eaten, and then rocks are thrown at the ships and the ships sink, and only Odysseus's ship manages to escape. And like I feel the movie I thought it was going in this direction first when they find a child Laestrygonian. So like it looks like an adult, but then he turns around and it's a kid, and that's kind of freaky. I love that, actually. It was like Alice in Wonderland kind of way, like that sort of uncanny, like it's a child, it's like kind of like a baby-faced child but taller than the adults, and it just feels topsy-turvy world, and I really like that kind of surrealism that I wouldn't expect again in a Christopher Nolan film, or even in the Odyssey, to be honest, but it works. First I thought it was a missed chance here because that kid could have brought them back and then shown, we are bad hosts, right? Like hospitality is a huge theme in the poem, the Odyssey, and to his credit, Christopher Nolan makes it a huge theme of this film. Like, hospitality is so important, it's woven throughout everything, and I just thought like that was handled really, really well. So I thought missed chance here because the giant baby doesn't do that. He just calls his parents or whatever, and it's all just silly fighting at first. I was just laughing because they're all wearing medieval armor, and it's snowing, and they've ended up somehow in like Northern Europe, and the whole film is much darker than the Mediterranean setting, but like it makes sense. Like that's what the idea is, that they're far from home, they've gone away from the world of Greece, and like how we imagine Greek myth is meant to be scary. So that sort of dislocation, which when I saw the trailer I thought that's just ridiculous, in the film actually feels like, okay, I get why they're scared, right? They've maybe never seen these kind of like fir trees and snow and stuff like this, right? Anyway, the Laestrygonians tearing into them and destroying their ships was like harrowing. It was just shot so well. The pacing was brilliant. The action was fun. And I just had like my heart in my mouth, the whole thing. And that was the most memorable scene of the film for me, honestly. Like that is the one that stands out the most for me. So even though like it was so simple, it was just action and just fighting, the Laestrygonians also get a big thumbs up in terms of adaptation. Next, we have BookTube's favorite mythological witch, and it's, of course, Circe. The way that we know it's Circe is that as the crew are going up to her little hut on a mountain, again, very European. Deliberately, I see now this Northern European feeling to make it feel strange for the Greek soldiers, right? But adding on to this is this big lion outside the hut. And the second we saw the lion, I just smiled. I smiled because that lion... It's like Alice in Wonderland again. It's like kind of this weird surrealism. Like, why are there wild things here? Why is this exotic animals like a safari? What's going on? Like, it feels strange, unnerving. But if you're a Greek myth fan, once you see that lion, you're like, I know what's about to happen. It just felt like a lovely like Easter egg for the Greek myth nerds, like to make us feel like, aha, we know what's going on, and for everybody else I think it's also good because it's like, just what, why, what, where, so that was a lovely introduction to Circe. And then again, no divinity in this movie, or is there? But anyway, like in terms of like the characters that we see on the screen, there's no divinity. So how does Circe have power? She is still a witch. I was really wondering how they were going to do the pig stuff with Circe, right? She turns them all into pigs in the poem, and I was like, are they going to do that? Because they've gotten rid of the divinity things, but they've kept the kind of supernatural monsters. Will there be magic in the world, basically? And will they be able to do it in a way that it doesn't just look silly and out of place? And the way that Nolan solved this problem is by going full body horror. This is like, Pinocchio's Pleasure Island meets David Cronenberg, right? It's like, it's a high level of disgust, and I was covering my eyes. It was really affecting, I thought, like, and just really horrifying how she turns them into pigs. But it happens, lots of bone crunching. And then when Odysseus comes up and she says, let's eat one of the pigs, and the pigs are like squealing, it's kind of scary, and again, like a bit surreal, like more surreal than you would expect in both a Christopher Nolan film and a mainstream Hollywood blockbuster. It's pretty weird, but also it feels like very familiarly like a fairy tale, right? And it's quite funny. I thought it was funny. Okay, the humor in this film is this is a little tangent here. I thought this was quite a funny film, and I think to a degree, Christopher Nolan is trying to be a little bit funny here, but it's also a very, very, very serious film, like all of his other films, right? So I don't know if it's intentionally funny or not. I was laughing through a lot of the film, right? And this was a scene that I was laughing at as well. But laughing in a sort of horrified way, like still covering my eyes and like that kind of feeling, It's, it's silly, but it's scary. And we like that here. We like that on this channel. Circe is also, right, yeah. So we see her have dominance over the men, as she should do, while also not having the divine magical powers and stuff like that. She tricks them. She turns them into pigs. And we also get like some backstory for her as a sort of rape victim or someone who's been through a traumatic past. Like when she sees the crew, she just starts, screaming. And then afterwards she confronts Odysseus and says, like, you sent these men up to like a woman by herself in times of, war and stuff like that. Like, what did you think was going to happen? Did you think that I was just going to, like everything would be nice, we'd all eat food? No, like there's something like this gritty realism about her. And, the way that she insinuates rape so strongly, which is so important for the whole film to work. And I'm going to probably get into that later on at the end. But I thought this was brilliant. She also has a sister who's a crow, which I don't remember. I really doubt that that's in the original poem. It feels a lot more Maleficent than it does Homer. But I loved it. It just gives you like a sense of like what happened there. Like, why is her sister a crow now? She just has a sort of a backstory and a lot of personality. And again, it's just Christopher Nolan, I don't want to say like necessarily improving on Homer's, female characters, but making them make sense in a more psychologically interesting way for a modern audience. The Land of the Dead. I thought this was fine. It was funny. Again, I think that when at the end of the scene, the dead just start chasing the crew for no reason, right? Like, because it's their old dead crew and they're angry because Odysseus made choices which lead to his men dying. And it's all of the monsters tie into the themes of this new Odyssey, which are not there in the first one, but we'll get into that later. But yeah, they're chasing him and he just says, let's go. And they all just run and there's no sense of real threat. And it's like, yeah, this happens all the time in the Odyssey, in the poem, that you arrive in a place, you check it out, and then you get the hell out of there before they catch you. But it's so Monty Python-esque. Like his "let's go" sounds so much like "run away" from the Holy Grail movie, right? So that every time they had to run away, I think I laughed a bit. But this was the silliest one. I laughed a lot when they're running away from the dead. There's no sense of threat, and I feel like it's at least slightly intentional. The whole running away thing is one of the reasons why a heroic Odysseus shouldn't work. It's why I think also just making a Hollywood film of the Odyssey shouldn't really work, because like these are the most unheroic heroes, right? Like the whole thing is that they arrive and then they avoid things. Odysseus is an avoiding kind of character. He doesn't want danger. He doesn't want to go to the Trojan War. He just wants to avoid stuff all the time so that he can live a peaceful life, right? This is why people like him. But in this one, they're meant to be heroes, right? Or at least Matt Damon's meant to be a hero. So the fact that there's so much, let's get out of here, it's like, it's just funny, right? I feel like it's just hard to keep a straight face, and like I don't know if I'm meant to. I hope not. But also I don't care. It's just that I think it's better for the film if you can laugh a little bit, because it's so relentless. This is like, again, a pacing thing. Unlike the Odyssey, where, you know, you have some loses and you have some wins, you have some hits, you have some misses. You know, Circe turns you into pigs, but then you live for a year with her, and like she's a great host. And you know, in the case of Odysseus, you have sex with her, and like everyone's happy, and it's just like a good time, you know. And you just have like nice places in the story, right? This is not like that. This is just like grim, darker, colder. Everything gets worse. Everyone is having a bad time all the time. So the laughter, I think, gave me a little bit of relief, and I don't know if it's meant to be there or not, but like in any case, I thought the dead were pretty funny. Comment down below if you laughed at this scene, or if you found any humor in the film at all. I'm very curious to hear what people think about this. Next up, we have the tag team duo of Scylla and Charybdis, and okay, this is the most anxiety-inducing part for me, and I think it's nothing to do with the film, to be honest, but because of a dream I had a week before I watched it, involving the death of one of my cousins because of a whirlpool. And it was in a canal. Like it wasn't like a big open sea whirlpool, but he died, and I nearly died, but he saved me, and then he died saved. Anyway, the point is that I was watching it with my cousins, and the cousin who died was sitting next to me, and I was just dreading the whole time, like there's going to be a big whirlpool in this, right? And I just felt something terrible was connected to the dream and the whirlpool on the screen. And so when they finally got there, and because the whole film is like I said, quite grim and quite relentless, and it's also big screen IMAX, I'm not used to it. It was so overwhelming. And I know that they're not going to go into the whirlpool, but when they got away from it, I felt so relieved. I felt like kind of, oh, finally I can just relax for the rest of this film. Like I didn't get sucked into the screen. My cousin didn't get sucked into the screen. It was all chill, but like that was incredibly tense. And then we got to Scylla, and that was just great monster design. I thought, you know, it was short, it was sweet. It was scary. It like with the little that we saw of her and the environment that she lives in, I can imagine that, yeah, this is an animal that lives in this kind of place and waits for boats and, you know, just eats the people that come by, and maybe, you know, eats a dolphin from time to time. So yeah, chef's kiss, great monster design, everything I want from Scylla, basically. At the same time, they do work in the theme a little bit because of this tension that Odysseus has to make the choice between, you know, certain death for everyone if they go into the whirlpool or towards Charybdis, or, you know, 6 people die, but you get to go, definitely the rest of the crew will survive, right, if you go through Scylla. I think this is where the expression between the devil and the deep blue sea comes from, right? I've never seen anyone, like, explain this, or I've never found it on the internet, right? But, you know, the deep blue sea being Charybdis and the devil being Scylla, it just makes sense. And the whole feeling is between a rock and a hard place, right? Anyway, yeah, it's sort of like not just a philosophical thing about utilitarianism, about trying to, you know, like maximize your chances or take a chance where you lose everything, but maybe you save everybody, right? There's also the aspect of like the intergroup dynamic and his responsibility for his crew and for keeping people alive and not just making robotic decisions, you know, because that is what will serve him the best or serve, you know, the Greeks the best. Anyway, it's all like thematic, right? And then the next monster, the Sirens, also short and sweet, but also like ticking all the boxes for what we want from the Odyssey monsters, right? Tie me to the mast, wax in the ears. They added this lovely thing of a guy, I'm pretty sure this isn't in the poem, like a guy takes out his earwax, hears the song, his face lights up, and he jumps into the sea to die. That was a great touch. I just thought it was a brilliant, like easy to do and show you the real danger of being, you know, led astray by the Sirens. But at the same time, it's changed because, you know, when people ask Matt Damon Odysseus, what did you hear? He's saying, I heard like the sounds of like my regrets and my desires and the things that I wished that I could do but that I can never undo. And like it's just like you get the sense it's very much the song is an individual kind of trauma, or like the thing which will hurt you the most, which is drawn out to the front, and you have the opportunity to get rid of it, which is what makes you want to go to the Sirens, which isn't really the Sirens, right, from Homer, but why not? There's actually loads to say about the Siren song, both in Homer and like kind of what it represents and so on. But like, let's just leave it now. It also feels like we're getting to the heart of things now, right? Like that is something that I really liked in this film, that not only do all the monsters have a sort of connection to this theme of like, who is this Odysseus, right? Which is definitely not in the original, right? Where it's a lot more just like picaresque, and yeah, there's thematic unity in Homer's poem as well, but like it's not so character driven, right? And in this one, like it's a kind of about finding out who is this Odysseus, and when we hear his reaction to the Siren song, it feels like we're kind of honing in on him. It feels like we're kind of like in Charybdis, just like circling around the core of this character about what makes him tick, right? And we're getting closer and closer through the separate encounters, right? So creating a sort of, you know, a narrative through line through all these separate incidents is actually like really talented, I think, as a storyteller, as a writer. I just think it's very clever. The next one we have is the Cattle of Helios. Just don't eat the cows, arrive on an island and don't eat the cows. Whatever you do, if you eat the cows, you die, right? And they eat the cows and they die. But like the thing that's so good about it is like how realistic and normal everything feels, even though it's such a fairy tale story, because yeah, they're just normal cows from what we can see, right? And then the storm that kills them, even though it's the wrath of Zeus, you know, avenging what's he called, the son Helios, right? With this storm to destroy the ship, it is just like you feel this is what it would be like to die on a ship in a storm. It's so real. It's edited and cut in such a way that you feel like you're there. And the man screaming, like the first mate screaming, like pray for forgiveness. You know, that feeling of absolute despair is so harrowing. And yeah, like I said, so real. Like this is, you think, yeah, this is how a lot of men have died at sea. And it would be a horrible way to die. And so that hit me really hard. And I thought, again, just really well done to do the whole fairy tale narrative and yet show it like just this is real life. You know, you eat meat and then you die. And you try and create this framework, this story to explain it all with gods and magic, right? But also at the end of the day, nature is just tough, man. I'm going to skip all the suitor stuff basically because, you know, I'm not that interested in talking about them and it takes up a lot of film and they weren't the main thing. I'm glad, I was happy that they had a lot of prominence in the film. I thought Penelope was bland. I thought Telemachus was bland. I thought their whole dynamic didn't have any fizz to it, no chemistry, no charisma. And I thought the swineherd, Eumaeus, was great. I thought the dog, Argus, fantastic. Just what you want. I loved Robert Pattinson. The camera loved his face as well, and he made it worthwhile, right? Like he sounded like a classical British villain, even though he was doing the American accent somehow. Like he's just did something amazing with like his intonations, I think. No, not the pronunciation, but the intonations had this I'm a British bad guy kind of thing. And he was just a good bad guy. They invented this backstory for him, which I'm fine with. I'm fine with like the way they centralized him as a villain. But yeah, I don't need to talk about that whole thing because honestly it took up a lot of the film and it's not the most interesting thing, because now I've come to the most interesting thing, which is Odysseus. So when I first heard that Christopher Nolan was making an adaptation of the Odyssey, I thought it sounded like a joke because, you know, the Odyssey is this like series of adventures and it's like kind of this very typical like image that we have of Greek mythology as like guys fighting big monsters, right, and then saving princesses or whatever, right? It's just like kind of a fun campy image, right, through Hollywood and through visual media, through the Harryhausen films and stuff like that. And you know what Christopher Nolan did to Batman in the 2000s, you know, take this very popular camp silly fun comic book character image and make it deadly serious, right? And find great success with that shift. But what he did with Batman in the 2000s there's no way he can replicate in the 2020s, especially not with the Odyssey. His version of Batman with Christian Bale, I can imagine as being a Batman, right? Like a version like of this iconic popular culture character in a way that the Matt Damon Odysseus, for me, will never be Odysseus, right? He is just so totally different. And also the culture has changed, right? Like in the West, we were moving from the Spice Girls into My Chemical Romance. We were moving from kind of goofy Tobey Maguire Spider-Man into cynical kind of like politically aware, what's he called? Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr. was the face of this kind of change, right? That happened around like the mid 2000s, as well, of course, as Christopher Nolan's Batman, right? But now everyone's tired of Marvel movies, right? Nobody really wants all this grim, gritty stuff all the time. At least I feel that like it's got much more fatigue around it than before. So the idea of Christopher Nolan making this like kind of super serious, dark, gritty, The Odyssey sounds like the setup to a joke, and the punchline of that joke is Matt Damon starring as Odysseus. It's not quite as bad as that last action hero thing where they show Arnold Schwarzenegger is playing Hamlet, right? But that's in parody, right? That's meant to be funny. This is serious. This is like dead serious. This is the film. The only way I thought that would make sense, right, is there's a few roles that Matt Damon has done where he's this sort of slimy, dislikable character. The Talented Mr. Ripley, based on the Patricia Highsmith novel, right? He's brilliant in that. And also The Departed, where he's this policeman who's like kind of actually a criminal. And in both of the films, he's got his honest, open Matt Damon face, but at the same time, he's stabbing you in the back. And there's just something so dislikable about him. So I thought if they do that, that is the only way that this Odysseus could make sense as an Odysseus, because there is a slimy side to the character of Odysseus, and it wouldn't be the first time that a writer has decided to emphasize and bring out that aspect of this hero, right? Like, for example, Shakespeare in Troilus and Cressida, his Odysseus is horrible, like a really nasty creep, right? But it works because you can see how this fits kind of the character. You know, it is a part of this character that we find in Homer. But yeah, with this director and this cast and this material, this film should have been a failure. I was 100% sure, especially after seeing the trailer, that this was going to be a train wreck. And isn't it nice to be wrong sometimes? Isn't it so nice to be wrong sometimes? The reason that Matt Damon fits this role just fine is because this rewritten character of Odysseus is written to suit him and his sort of style of gruff acting, right? So he does a perfectly serviceable job. The first scene in the film where I knew that this was Odysseus as we'd never seen him before, and I, reacted kind of like, ew, what's this, right? Was when we see he chooses to go to war, right? Agamemnon comes to take him away to the Trojan War, right? And in the myth, what he does is he fakes madness, right? This is classic Odysseus. He tells everybody, just tell that guy that the master's gone crazy, and all the slaves are like, oh no, our master's gone crazy. And he's plowing the field with salt, right? Like, which would destroy a field and make it not work properly. And he's singing and having a good time. And they're all like, guess you can't take him to war because he's so crazy. But actually, what the Greeks have is the second smartest person in the world, Palamedes, and he's already on side. So he says, put the baby in front of the plow. And so they put Telemachus in front of the plow, and Odysseus has to swerve and pull back on the ox to like kind of stop it from crushing his child. And then they're like, you're not crazy, you're a fake, now get on our ships. And so that's why he's forced to go to war. Like, Odysseus never wants to go to a stupid war. This is how he sees himself as defending his family. He is the kind of person who will make a fool of himself, right? So that he can avoid conflict, so that he can stay to protect his family and be like a good husband, a good father and all this stuff. And then like maybe laugh about it afterwards. Like, and then do you remember the time that I pretended I was crazy? Matt Damon's gruff Odysseus is like your standard American action hero guy where he's like, if I don't go, they're going to come for him next. And he points at like this infant baby as though, that baby was ever going to fight in this same war, right? But it's the idea that this is your kind of typical masculine hero who is self-sacrificing, he's taking responsibility, he will put himself in harm's way to protect his home, to protect his woman, to protect his child, right? It's this sort of like hyper-masculine but very typical image of what a hero should be is how the film starts, right? And I hated it, but when I saw it, I was like, that is not Odysseus. But as the movie went on, I realized, okay, yeah, it's not Odysseus, right? It's a different character. So why are we doing this? And it's got this interesting arc, right? Whereas the Odyssey from Homer doesn't really have much of an arc. He just wants to go home. Always he wants to go home. This one, as it goes on, we keep hearing maybe he doesn't want to go home. Like, Calypso is saying, like, are you sure you want to go home? There's part of you which doesn't seem to really want to go home. This Odysseus is not a slippery eel like in Homer. He is a tough guy who, when we see on Calypso's island, is broken and changed, and something has happened to him. And as the film goes on, we are asking ourselves more and more, what has happened to this guy, right? What is up with this guy? And slowly we're starting to get it. So if you've got this far into the video, I presume that you don't mind me saying the thing that the film keeps circling around, which is, I think, a stroke of genius, but was basically a big twist for me because it's a new idea. And so I'm gonna spoil it. This is your last chance to run away and watch the film if you haven't, or just stick around and see what you think. Spoiler, it's the Trojan War. The Trojan War is what messed him up so much. We find out when he's talking to Penelope. So the really good thing about new interpretations of iconic characters is that they make you appreciate or notice things about that character in their life that you had never noticed before. So maybe I'm the only one here, but I had never really thought about how Odysseus's role in ending the Trojan War could have a devastating psychological repercussion on him. In fact, I was toying with the idea of making a video as a lead up to the film, talking about the 10 worst things that Odysseus ever did, or something like that, because I knew he was going to be a heroic character in the film. So I thought, why not burst that bubble and just say these are some of the really shitty things this guy did. But on my list of terrible things, I was only thinking of how he directly hurts people or ruins their lives. I never thought of the Trojan horse, right? So I'm really actually grateful for Christopher Nolan for showing me this side of Odysseus. And yeah, the Trojan horse is the worst thing he ever did because it led to a genocide, right? It wasn't just directly hurting someone's life, it was indirectly causing a genocide of a whole people. So I actually think that the Odyssey is Oppenheimer Part 2. I'm not sure if anybody else has talked about this. I haven't watched any reviews or read any reviews yet because I don't be reacting or responding to other people's things. I'm going to save all that reading for after I have made this video. But yeah, Christopher Nolan made this film, Oppenheimer, about a guy who creates a great evil. He's an enabler for an evil which is possibly civilizational, in that it can end all of civilization and stuff like that. And the thing in that film is that, if he succeeds, then he also fails in a way. And there's a sort of ambivalence about his feelings towards that. But we know all that in that film from the very beginning, right? We know that atomic bombs are bad and that he's in a war where he wants to win the war. And so that's why he's going to do it. And that would lead to ambivalent feelings. And it's a very shallow character. Christopher Nolan isn't a character kind of writer. He doesn't have the ability, I think, or the interest in exploring people very deeply. And in that film, Cillian Murphy does an amazing job with a very, very shallow character and basically no material. And he gets lots of close-ups and he does a really good job, but there's nothing to Oppenheimer, really. So in this film, Christopher Nolan is basically doing the same thing, but also the opposite thing, right? Matt Damon didn't have to do any work to bring to life one of the most interesting characters that Christopher Nolan has ever done, who is also, grappling with this civilizational destruction, the fact that he enabled, so much evil to come into the world. And we find out at the end that it's not just the destruction of the Trojan people, right? But also that by violating all the codes of hospitality, which are so important to the Greeks and also to the world of the Odyssey, the poem by Homer, right? By violating all those codes, then this is actually going to bring about the end of the Bronze Age, the collapse of the Bronze Age. This civilization is going to fall and become degenerate and lean towards piracy and stuff like that. There's no way that this Odysseus would actually think this. It's kind of silly, but the idea is there that he has this culpability. So as a character study, this is Nolan's best film since Memento, I'm going to say. And yeah, I'm doing relatively speaking here. We're obviously here for the monsters and the sailing, and Christopher Nolan doesn't make character films really. But it's still something I never would have guessed going into this film, and it was such a pleasant surprise. And I can see this director, continuing but expanding on a theme that obviously interests him, but also being respectful to the Greek myths and the story and of Homer's poem and the theme in that of hospitality. Because in most, representations, Odysseus is just like, hey, cool trick, right? Like I won the war with this horse thing. And it's never really delved into like his personal responsibility over that. But at the same time, the Trojan War hangs over almost all the Greek myths I know that come after it, whether it's like the Oresteia and all the kind of the blood and murder that comes from that, or else the different nostoi, like the people trying to get home, just like Odysseus did. A lot of it, like stuff is in the shadow of the Trojan War, and that feeling of the Trojan War casting a shadow over all the Greek myths which follow makes sense to like kind of respect that in a way which isn't actually in Homer's poem, the Odyssey, but like is in this new form, which is like this psychological aspect of the Odysseus character. My cousin said that the one who nearly got sucked into the whirlpool said that this is like the white guilt Odysseus. And I think that really hits the nail on the head, because this film like visually evokes not just colonialism and like climate change, but also like thematically, the decline of liberal institutions, the rise of demagoguery, and like kind of the falling apart of these universal laws which keep societies together and in check. And all these things like feel very relevant to the here and now, while at the same time resonating with the despair of this new Odysseus. And at the same time, they're respectful to the Greek myths because of the shadow of the Trojan War being cast over of the future of everything, right? So is any of this in Homer's poem? Like, no, absolutely not. But have any other writers, whether classical or modern, retelling these myths cared about trying to recreate the spirit of Homer? No. So if you want Homer, read Homer. This actually reminds me more of Euripides, right? The way that he takes the myths and keeps the general outline of them, but will just change some things, like maybe a character, maybe an event, and change it entirely so that we see those myths in a new way, which makes them resonate with the world around us and like kind of what we are going through, like as a group of people in the 21st century, right? As well as some of the minor criticisms I mentioned, I do have like one or two bigger ones. Namely, I think most of all was the Puritanism, right, of the film. So like it just seems very unrealistic the way that, apart from that key moment with Circe talking about rape in a very indirect way, and also where we see Helen of Troy having a scarred face, Lupita Nyong'o was completely underutilized in this film. Like that was also quite sad. Mia Goth as well. I'm sorry I'm going on a tangent here, but like there were some signs that like very talented female actors were given absolutely nothing to do in this film. Whereas John Bernthal as Menelaus, he was amazing, and he's not a famous actor, but he had a lot to do in this film. And I loved it because I love John Bernthal. I've only seen him in like 3 things, and he's always a cuckold. He's always macho, and he's always got this like sad puppy kind of fearful look in his eyes. And maybe he's typecast, but I say if you can do something well, and just why not keep doing it, right? Be the best at that little niche. I love actors like that. So whether he's happy or not with the role, I think it was brilliant. But yeah, even though I love John Bernthal as Menelaus, I do think that probably some of his lines should have gone to Helen. Lupita Nyong'o could have done a lot more if she'd been given the time to do it. And she could have just talked to Telemachus and made him have a more interesting character. Like they have a bit where she says, "Tell your mother I'm sorry about what happened." That could have been a conversation. He could have said, "I've hated you for so many years because of what you did to my father and all these fathers." And that can and then she can give her side of the story as Helen, and that could be so interesting. But she had nothing to do. And Tom Holland as Telemachus was also just like a wet blanket through the whole thing. Anyway, that was a massive tangent. I was talking about the Puritanism. Yeah, there's no sex. We have a kind of vaguely very vanilla sexually implied thing with Odysseus and Penelope, but then there's no sex with Calypso, even though they've been living together and loving each other for 7 years. It's not even implied, right? Because he needs to be this sort of perfect husband figure, which you can kind of get. Yeah, it's a Hollywood film, but there's also no even glances of nudity or suggested thing. Everyone is, they cut out the Nausicaa thing, which is the most famous nudity thing in the Odyssey poem, I think, right? And I understand why they did that, because like I said, they condensed a few things into Calypso's character. But yeah, the rape as well, all types of sex and sexuality were gone, and that seems just not very Greek, right? And the rape is very much in every Greek myth, and in the Trojan War scenes, when they're showing the genocide, there's a lot of women being stabbed, and I guess that's meant to imply stuff. And I'm not saying that I wanted to see something graphic on the screen. But to me, it's like we know that the most degenerate parts of humanity occur when you have these things like in Gaza, like in Nanjing, like these moments where a bunch of men go into a place and they just completely destroy it. Usually it involves sexual violence as well as mass murder, right? And the fact that the film is trying to show us like this is the worst of humanity that is being unleashed here thanks to this Trojan horse. And then not showing it as bad as it really is in real life, I thought was just cowardly. And it robbed it of some of its power. And I was thinking, is this for ratings? I thought it must be for ratings because I felt like I wouldn't be surprised if in America you can show people being killed and like this violent body horror pig transmorphing scene, which is really horrific, right? But at the same time, you can't show like a nipple or whatever, just to get like a good family rating. But I looked and it's rated R, right? So they could have included sex scenes. So it's not even just American prudishness. It's actually like Christopher Nolan, I guess, being kind of prudish about stuff because sex in his films is kind of weird as well. But anyway, like the lack of sexuality I thought was just odd, and it like kind of felt artificial and took me out of the film a bit. But yeah, it's an American film for Americans really, like, and the rest of the world is sort of secondary, which is often the case with Hollywood. And that's not necessarily such a bad thing, right? Like the idea of Odysseus being this gruff, tough, traditional masculine guy who just wants to do what's right for his family, and then he ends up committing a genocide, right? And feeling just lost and displaced and like everything is falling apart. But it does feel like it's just sort of designed for a certain generation, and also maybe especially men, and maybe especially liberal American centrist men. But I'm fine with that. Like it felt fresh and new, and most importantly it was entertaining and affecting and thoughtful, and it unified a bunch of the Odysseus's like various adventures into themes which are relevant to the modern day. So what more could you want? I would not say that this film is like a new favorite or anything like that, despite how I've gone on about it, but it's just miles better than it has any right to be, and it significantly restored my faith in Christopher Nolan as a director, which had, you know, kind of disintegrated a long time ago. So like, I mean, I'm happy, right? Maybe low expectations are making me feel happier than I should be. But what did you think about the film? Were you sad, like I was, that Aeolus and his bag of winds didn't make the cut? Were you freaked out that, like, in a world with no lust whatsoever, only Penelope seems to be horny for Robert Pattinson in a way which just felt like really awkward and strange? Do you also think that Lupita Nyong'o and Mia Goth deserve better? Or just what was your favorite monster? Let me know down in the comments. Let's chat about it there, and I'll catch you in my next video. Bye.